Maybe one of the benefits of me talking to you today is that you'll see that maybe not everything is true that you've heard about me.
The inmate, refusing orders to be restrained, was ordered to be tasered at 5:50 a.m.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear the evidence you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
What would be your intention if you're forced to live in prison?
Do everything I can to escape, and if necessary, kill prison guards on the way out. And I'll go right back to doing what I did before as soon as I hit the streets.
Which is what?
Kill kids.
Kill kids.
Yes.
So you should be executed for the safety of others.
Yes.
The craziest death row, executions of all time. Throughout history, capital punishment has been a point of intense scrutiny, often evolving from an expression of societal justice into a spectacle of horror, chaos, and, at times, grotesque failure. Some executions were executed flawlessly, while others went terribly wrong, leaving behind a legacy of suffering, debate, and uncertainty. Here are 6 of the most shocking and dramatic executions, each marked by its own unique and haunting details that made them unforgettable. Wesley Allen Dodd.
Why do you want to be executed?
I have to be. Because I will kill again.
Wesley Allen Dodd was a predator whose name became synonymous with pure evil after he abducted, sexually assaulted, and murdered 3 young boys in Washington state in 1989. His crimes were calculated and cold, with Dodd even keeping a detailed diary where he described his horrifying actions, which he believed he was driven to commit because of his uncontrollable urges. The trial was swift, and Dodd's guilt was undeniable. However, what made his case truly unique was his utter lack of remorse and his insistence on dying for his crimes.
No, I would do it again. I've been molesting kids nonstop since I was 13 years old.
While most death row inmates seek to appeal their sentences or delay their executions, Dodd shocked the system by actively requesting that his death sentence be carried out as quickly as possible. He stated that he could not live with himself, and the only way to stop his compulsions was through death. In his chilling statement, he explained that he would continue to harm children if he were allowed to live, making his execution inevitable. Dodd also made a peculiar demand. He wanted to die by hanging, a method of execution that had not been used in Washington for decades. He believed the gruesome nature of hanging matched the horror of his crimes.
Anything happened, I can guarantee I'd do it again, and sooner or later I would kill another child. I've done it before, and at the time I liked it. I'm not going to say who, but there is somebody out there. There's a man out there.
There's a man.
Yeah.
Someone related to the case that got you imprisoned in the first place?
Not directly, no.
But it's something that you know that you're going to do, or you plan to do, you want to do.
Yeah.
Did your execution do any good?
I think it would. I think a few child molesters, anyway, are going to think twice before they do anything again.
How do you live with yourself daily?
At times, it's not easy. I said there's times I think about what I've done. I think about some of the things the boys said before they died, and that's real hard to think about. At other times, I just try to put everything out of my mind.
Do you look forward to dying?
In a way, yeah. I think it'd be a relief. I don't have to think about all these things anymore. And I know that's the only way I can guarantee I'm not going to hurt anybody else. You know, right now I can sit here and say I don't want to, but I know it'll happen.
On January 5, 1993, Dodd's wish was granted, and the gallows were prepared at Washington State Penitentiary. As Dodd stood on the platform, he displayed an unsettling calmness. He declined a final meal and refused to make a last statement. The absence of remorse was palpable in the air as Dodd looked out at his audience of onlookers, perhaps one last time. When the trapdoor opened, Dodd's body dropped and the rope snapped tight around his neck. Within moments, he was pronounced dead, the execution quick and efficient, but the emotions in the room were far from settled. Some saw it as justice served, while others reflected on the disturbing request for such a barbaric method. His hanging remains a deeply unsettling example of the extremes of justice. Timothy McVeigh. Timothy McVeigh's execution in 2001 marked the end of one of the deadliest acts of domestic terrorism in U.S. history. McVeigh's bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City on April 19, 1995, killed 168 people, including 19 children, and injured hundreds more. His motivation was rooted in anti-government sentiments, and he viewed the bombing as retaliation for government actions like the Waco siege and Ruby Ridge incident. The bombing shocked the nation, and McVeigh became the face of homegrown extremism.
Where he now sits on death row awaiting a date for his execution. Because of his appeal, one of the conditions his lawyer laid down was that we not ask him directly, "Are you the Oklahoma City bomber?"
During his trial, McVeigh showed no remorse. He referred to the 168 innocent lives lost as collateral damage in his war against the federal government. His lack of empathy and chilling demeanor only added to the horror surrounding his actions. When sentenced to death, McVeigh chose not to appeal, preferring instead to let the sentence stand. His dispassionate acceptance of his fate made the situation even more surreal.
Maybe one of the benefits of me talking to you today is that you'll see that maybe not everything is true that you've heard about me.
For example, what's not true?
Well, am I pure evil? Am I the face of terror sitting here in front of you? Or am I able to talk to you man to man?
Most people in this country think you are the face of evil, don't they?
They do. But sitting down here now, and let me make clear, I'm not sitting here trying to influence you. And I'm not putting on a game face. I'm not conning anybody. I'm just being me.
McVeigh was executed by lethal injection at the Federal Correctional Complex in Terre Haute, Indiana. The execution was witnessed by a select group of victims' family members, survivors, and media outlets. McVeigh's last words were brief, as he simply said, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul," quoting the poem Invictus. His cold demeanor as the lethal injection was administered left many witnesses uncomfortable, with some even questioning whether justice had been fully served. McVeigh did not express regret or sorrow for the lives he had taken. His execution was a chilling reminder of the silent terror he had unleashed, and it only further cemented his legacy as a figure of radical extremism and unrepentant violence. Wallace Wilkerson's execution is infamous for being one of the most botched and tragic deaths in the history of capital punishment. Convicted of murder in Utah in 1879, Wilkerson's sentence was death by firing squad, a method that was often seen as efficient and final. However, in his case, it turned into a horrific public spectacle.
In 1879, American stockman Wallace Wilkerson shot dead a man following a dispute over a game of cribbage. He was sentenced to death by firing squad. But what happened next will horrify you. On the day of his execution, witnesses claimed that Wilkerson appeared to be drunk. Well, who wouldn't be? And he declined a blindfold. The firing squad lined up, raised their rifles, and pulled the triggers. Amazingly, they all missed his heart, instead hitting him in the body and arms. Wilkerson jumped up and shouted, my God, they missed it." Doctors then tried to decide what to do. Should they execute him again or give him a reprieve? The question didn't need answering. 27 minutes later, Wilkerson was pronounced dead. He died of blood loss.
Wilkerson's crime was simple enough. He had been involved in a violent argument in a saloon that ended with the shooting death of a man. As a result, he was sentenced to death, and the date of execution was set. On the day of his death, Wilkerson refused the blindfold that was customarily given to condemned men, opting instead to face his executioners. He defiantly declared, "I'll give you a better target," puffing out his chest in what was perhaps an ill-advised show of bravado. When the firing squad opened fire, things went horribly wrong. Wilkerson was hit, but not fatally. The shots struck his shoulder and chest, but none of them hit his heart or vital organs. Wilkerson collapsed, still alive, writhing on the ground in agony. Blood flowed freely as the condemned man struggled, groaning and attempting to move. For nearly 27 minutes, Wilkerson suffered while the crowd looked on in horror. His death became a drawn-out, grotesque display of human suffering. William Kemmler. The execution of William Kemmler in 1890 was meant to usher in a new era of humane capital punishment, but instead, it became one of the most nightmarish chapters in the history of executions. Kemmler was convicted of murdering his common-law wife, Tilly Ziegler, with a hatchet. His crime was heinous, but it was the method of his execution that would become infamous. The electric chair, newly invented as a supposedly more humane alternative to hanging, was chosen to carry out his death sentence. The first ever use of the electric chair took place on August 6, 1890, at Auburn Prison in New York. It was a highly anticipated event, with the public and media eager to see this new method in action. The procedure was supposed to be quick and painless, but what transpired was anything but. Kemmler was strapped into the chair, electrodes were attached to his body, and the switch was pulled. The first jolt of electricity surged through his body, and Kemmler's body convulsed violently. His hair and skin began to burn, and thick smoke filled the air. The stench of his flesh burning was described as unbearable, but the horror didn't stop there. After the first shock, Kemmler was still alive. A second jolt was applied, but it too proved ineffective. His body jerked and twitched uncontrollably, the burns becoming more severe, but he remained alive, enduring even more torment. It wasn't until the third attempt that he finally died, his body twitching one last time before succumbing to the electricity. The entire execution lasted several minutes, leaving witnesses in shock and horror. The gruesome spectacle exposed the fallibility of the electric chair as a humane method of execution. Kemmler's death set the stage for a long and contentious debate about the ethics of the electric chair, one that would persist for many years. His death was the horrific beginning of a method that would be used for decades, but the trauma of his execution remained etched in history. Clayton Lockett.
Timeline of the hours leading up to the execution of Clayton Lockett on Tuesday revealed that the 38-year-old convicted murderer was tasered and kept under watch after guards discovered a self-inflicted wound in his arm.
Lockett's death was part of a highly publicized execution in Oklahoma. The execution team used a new combination of drugs, a fact that became a point of controversy given the botched executions that had previously occurred with other methods of lethal injection. As the first drug was administered, Lockett appeared to fall unconscious, but within minutes he began to show signs of distress. His body began to convulse and his eyes opened, his chest heaving with labored breaths. The execution team realized that something had gone wrong, but it was too late to correct it. Lockett's veins were difficult to access and the drugs were not being delivered as intended.
On May the 1st, the day of Lockett's botched lethal injection, Oklahoma prison guards arrived at Lockett's cell at 5:06 a.m. to escort him for x-rays in preparation for his execution. The inmate, refusing orders to be restrained, was ordered to be tasered at 5:50 a.m. The guards quickly discovered a self-inflicted cut on his right arm and transported him to the medical facility at Oklahoma State Penitentiary, where Lockett was kept in a cell, watched by 3 guards until about 5:20 p.m. During that time, he refused food and final visits from his attorneys. By 5:22 p.m., Lockett was placed and restrained on the execution table, where a phlebotomist spent nearly 50 minutes trying to locate an injectable vein in his arms, legs, feet, and neck. The IV was finally inserted in the groin at 6:18 p.m. and the sedative midazolam was administered 5 minutes later. After the doctor declared Lockett unconscious at 6:33 p.m, the viewing room's curtains were lowered while the second and third drugs in the cocktail were administered. At 6:44 p.m, the doctor found that Lockett's injected vein had collapsed, causing the drugs to have either leaked or become absorbed into tissue. The Corrections Department director called off the execution at 6:56 p.m. after finding out not enough drugs remained to kill Lockett, who still retained a weak heartbeat. Lockett was pronounced dead at 7:06 p.m. after suffering a heart attack.
Witnesses described an agonizing scene as Lockett writhed and groaned in his restraints. At one point, his face turned purple and he began to gasp for air. Despite attempts to stop the execution, the drugs continued to course through his body, and the turmoil unfolded behind closed doors. Just 43 minutes after the first drug was administered, Lockett was declared dead from a heart attack. However, the horror of his drawn-out and botched execution became a national scandal.
The dozen reporters who witnessed the execution of Clayton Lockett returned to the media center more than 1 hour after the process began. They explained to those who did not witness the execution what just occurred.
Lockett's execution sparked an immediate outcry and reignited debates about the morality of the death penalty, particularly in light of the numerous failures related to lethal injections. Critics were horrified by the idea of a man enduring such suffering in his final moments, and many questioned the competency of the execution team and the ethicality of using untested drug protocols. Lockett's case marked a dramatic turning point in the discussion surrounding capital punishment, as it highlighted the risks and consequences of what was supposed to be a humane method. His death raised serious questions about transparency, accountability, and the very concept of a painless death. Mahin Kadiri. Mahin Kadiri was a woman whose execution became controversial for the sheer confusion and mystery surrounding the circumstances of her death. Kadiri was convicted of being part of a terrorist plot that aimed to overthrow the government in the country where she lived, though the details of the crime were murky at best. Some believed that her trial was politically motivated, while others insisted that she was an innocent bystander swept up in a larger conspiracy. Regardless, her death by execution would become one of the most contentious in modern history. Mahin Kadiri was sentenced to death for her alleged role in the failed plot to assassinate a government official, but the way her execution unfolded is what cemented her place in the annals of notorious executions. The execution itself took place in a remote prison, far from the eyes of international observers. No details were initially given about the method, and news reports were inconsistent, further contributing to the mystery. Though official reports suggested that Kadiri died instantly, survivors of the execution process reported seeing her flinch and writhe in pain as the execution method went awry. The authorities scrambled to suppress information, but rumors swirled, and human rights groups called for an investigation into the execution's mishandling. The ambiguity surrounding Kadiri's final moments cast a long shadow on her death, leaving many to wonder if it was a true act of justice or a cruel, unnecessary error.